Welcome back, guys. This is part 2 of the rotator cuff related pain rehab series. And again, the context of these videos is to improve pain-free shoulder flexion because we know a lot of rotator cuff injuries happen with overuse in overhead activities. Last video was working on that initial stage of shoulder flexion. Can we delay that humeral internal rotation so the rotator cuff doesn't have to work so hard at its end range of motion? And we can actually offload it to some of the other scapular stabilizers. That being said, when we're training hard, we can't just run away from the issue. Our rotator cuff is going to be experiencing high amounts of tension, high amounts of force, so we do need to eventually work on rehabbing the rotator cuff directly. So I like to initially get some isometric loading through the rotator cuff, working toward its end range position, then start strengthening the rotator cuff in deeper levels of shoulder flexion, as well as improving the rotational arc of the humerus so that it has full access to internal and external rotation. If your issues are more compression-based and you get more impingement-like symptoms with end-range shoulder flexion, we need to restore that end range and make sure it's pain-free. So we have to go there. We have to get that full 180 degrees of shoulder flexion back. And in my opinion, no rotator cuff rehab is complete without working on some hanging and resisting these traction forces. Enough talk, let's get into the exercises. Okay, the first exercise, we're going to go over some isometric loading for the rotator cuff. Now, isometrics can be done very early on within a rehab program, especially if you have tendinopathies. It can help reduce pain temporarily. And what I really like about isometrics is you can adjust the loading based on what you're comfortable with. Now, we're going to start with just more mid-range isometrics and then move into the end range. I find a very overlooked aspect of rotator cuff rehab is strengthening through horizontal adduction, because the infraspinatus, the teres minor, some of these external rotators that help horizontally abduct are never loaded through length in this direction. And maybe we can stretch them out like this, but we're actually not learning to produce force in these ranges. So we're going to eventually progress our isometrics into working at the lengthened position, because research shows lengthened position isometrics can have a pain relieving effect, but it can also help restructure the tendon over time. And if the tendon is very sensitive, then this can add some compressive load to the tendon, which might not feel good at first. This is why I like to address these in part 2. Because now we're working toward the end range of the rotator cuff. One rotator cuff muscle, the supraspinatus, performs abduction. So this is a very commonly injured rotator cuff muscle. How we're going to initiate this first isometric is just driving into the wall like this, as if we're trying to abduct and externally rotate. The closer we get to the wall, the more we could just generate internal tension just driving into the wall. And then the more we kind of slant our body away from the wall, it becomes more of a yielding isometric where we're preventing this motion from happening. Whereas the overcoming isometric, we're closer and we're just crushing our hand and our elbow into an immovable object, which is the wall. So this is always going to be a lighter position to start off with, and then we eventually want to work our way out here. So we have to really use the force of our rotator cuff to help prevent our body sagging to the wall. I like to hold these isometrics for 30 to 45 seconds. Research shows that really anything past that isn't going to have much greater effects that we're looking for in terms of tendon health. We're going to start just pushing into the wall. Okay, we can now explore different angles. Okay, so eventually I want to be able to turn my body toward the wall so that the rotator cuff is under more length. Okay, so as I start to turn here, now I can get into more of this horizontally adducted position. Okay, if you see from this side, the more I turn my chest toward this arm, the more length I feel in the back of the shoulder here. That's that rotator cuff lengthening. It's important here that we're not flexed over. Okay, we're not protracted at the scapula. We're keeping the scapula pulled back as I rotate. So I feel a ton of length going through here. My shoulder is outside the elbow, telling me that I'm horizontally adducted. And then the contraction here is I am pushing my elbow into the wall, I'm pushing my hand into the wall, okay? So we can hold this isometrically for time. We shouldn't feel any pinching in the front of the shoulder. We should just feel a good lengthening sensation back there, and we should also feel those muscles contracting. The more horizontal I get toward the ground, the more force production for those rotator cuff muscles. And eventually I could just do this on a bench as well, so that I'm not working on the wall and my body is completely parallel against the ground. We could start here. Body is turned away from the arm, so we're not even adducting. We're just working in a more mid-range, a more stable position. If you have a lot of pain in the shoulder currently, this is the variation you're going to want to use. And then slowly you could start turning more and more, so your chest is facing the bicep, okay? And if we hold these isometrics, if we do 3 to 4 sets, 30 to 45 seconds, you should notice some pain relief in the back side of the shoulder. And this is a good way to start getting load through the back of the shoulder in more of the end range. Once isometrics are feeling good, we could start to move dynamically through the range. I could turn toward the bicep, push my way out of it, turn, push out, okay? I can even start from here, fully abducted, start to adduct, turn the sternum toward the bicep, and then push away. So we're going from full adduction to abduction. So we're getting a lot of shortened range contraction back here, as well as some good lengthening through horizontal adduction. So the infraspinatus teres minor, even the posterior deltoid, which can act as a rotator cuff, is getting a really nice stimulus here. And again, the more I push my body outwards, drop my arm, this is a really nice stimulus that you could do dynamically for reps. 8 to 12 repetitions there with a hold in each position. You'll get a nice pump back there. But again, this is later stage rehab, and you should only be at around a 2 out of 10 pain before you move on to this. Okay, now during later stages of rotator cuff rehab, I want to make sure, can the humerus rotate fully through external rotation and internal rotation? Now, coming back from an injury, we have some scar tissue buildup. I want to load these tissues eccentrically. So to improve external rotation, I like to get on an elevated surface, whether it's a bench or a box, keep my elbow pinned to the side, have a heavy dumbbell, keep a protracted scapula, move out into external rotation, pause there, 3, 2, 1, and we can come over, use the other hand to assist it, bring it back. About 3 to 5 seconds on the way down, pause, 3, 2, 1, turn over, grab the weight. Okay, so we could do anywhere from 10 to 12 repetitions here with a 3-second pause at the end. And I like to finish the last rep with a 10-second pause there. Now again, make sure we stay protracted here, because oftentimes we try to mimic humeral external rotation with scapular retraction, okay? So if we can't externally rotate at the humerus, what are we going to do? We're going to arch the back and retract the scap. So to uncouple these motions, we want to stay in some degree of scapular protraction as we externally rotate. Okay, so now we're going to move on to eccentric internal rotation using the sleeper stretch. We're going to do a loaded sleeper stretch with a dumbbell. Now we already started getting some length and load through the rotator cuff with horizontal adduction, but now we're going to stress the rotator cuff even more through internal rotation. And we discussed in part 1 how deviating into internal rotation too early can cause the rotator cuff to work harder than it needs to. But that does also mean if we're going to be deviating into internal rotation functionally while we're training, we might as well fortify the rotator cuff to be able to handle forces in those end ranges. So that's why I like to use the sleeper stretch. Now commonly with the sleeper, we're in adduction and then internal rotation, and we're just generating that internal force through an isometric, driving the hand up into the top hand, and then relaxing, going deeper. That's fine. But we need to actually get these rotator cuff muscles lengthened under load. So we're going to use the dumbbell here, nice and slow, about 5 seconds on the way down. Hold, 3, 2, 1. Other hand assist back up, nice and slow. 3, 2, 1. Hold, 3, 2, 1. A couple things to look out for. We don't want to see this. If your hand is getting down there way too easy, check the scapula. We want to be able to keep this back of the scapula pinned to the ground. So retract the scapula, pull the shoulder blade back, take this shoulder, make sure it's stacked, and lower under control. If you're getting to around there, that means you're probably pretty stacked and you're not compensating. A lot of times people will lose that stack and they'll end up here. So they'll start stacked, and then to get more range, they turn away because now they're moving through less adduction of the shoulder. So again, you should be at around 2 to 3 out of 10 pain before you move on to this. This, again, it's a more later stage to really fortify that rotator cuff through end range. Not something I want to start with. So again, 8 to 12 repetitions, 3 to 5 second hold at the bottom, finishing with a 10-second hold. Now we're going to start working on improving full shoulder flexion and making sure we're pain-free at those end ranges. So the first exercise, we're going to work on shoulder flexion while keeping the scapula pinned down into retraction. So what this is doing, it's going to concentrate load through these scapulohumeral muscles. In particular, the teres major, teres minor, infraspinatus, the muscles that connect the scapula to the humerus. The goal here is to prevent the scapula from assisting shoulder flexion. So to get a full 180 degrees of flexion, the scapula needs to upwardly rotate. We know this. We want to prevent this so we can actually concentrate the load to the muscles that just move the humerus on the scapula without that scapula coming along for the ride, because now this requires muscles to lengthen that connect the trunk to the scapula. So we want to delay that from occurring. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to get in a half kneeling position. I'm going to side bend to the side we're lengthening, because what do people do to get to the scapula to upwardly rotate? They'll side bend away. So to prevent that, we side bend towards. Now, I'm going to bring the arm across the face slightly, get a little bit of humeral adduction. Okay, so immediately I should already start to feel length going through that back of the shoulder here, but now we're in higher degrees of shoulder flexion. So now I can tension further by moving my chest further toward the ground, going into more shoulder flexion. Now I feel much more length and load through the back of the shoulder there. What am I going to do? Let's drive isometrically. So I'm going to push my hand down. I'm pushing the stick into the ground, resisting that motion. About 10 seconds. Relax. Now what I can do is I can turn my sternum a little bit more toward this arm and then drop into more flexion. The goal here is to work into greater levels of shoulder flexion. Push. Relax. Okay, so we don't want to go so far that we lose this adduction of the humerus and the scapula starts hiking up here. Okay, so if I go into full shoulder flexion here, notice I have to abduct the shoulder slightly from this position, and now my scapula is starting to upwardly rotate. Okay, so honestly, when I'm doing this, I'm really not going past maybe 120 to 140 degrees of shoulder flexion here. And I'm focusing on this adduction, I'm focusing on staying retracted, and I'm focusing on keeping side bent. Okay? So 3 to 5 contraction cycles, 5 to 10 second isometrics, moving deeper after each one. We're going to go through a shoulder flexion superset to load that full range of shoulder flexion. The first exercise is going to be a unilateral dumbbell pullover, where we're trying to get into our maximum range of shoulder flexion and produce force coming out of it. And we're going to superset this with a shortening range drill, where we're working on actively contracting the muscles that pull us into our greatest level of shoulder flexion. So When we're doing this, we want to allow the scapula to move through its full excursion. I want to see that upward rotation, and I want to see the ability for it to retract at that end range of motion to afford the humerus space to even internally rotate a bit more as we go overhead. So I'm going to lay down. This could be a bench. I'm just using a box. We're going to be in a neutral shoulder position, so not fully externally rotated, not fully internally rotated. Full range here, anywhere from 8 to 12 reps. Rotator cuff does have to lengthen as we go fully overhead. And if your arm cannot get to full shoulder flexion, then that rotator cuff is going to have to be working harder than it needs to. When it comes to end range mobility, I like to pair lengthened bias exercises with shortened range bias exercises. And if you like this approach, I highly recommend you check out my Supple Shoulders program. In my opinion, it's one of the better resources out there for developing all of the ranges you need to access in the shoulder, whether it's shoulder flexion, extension, rotation, adduction, and abduction. So let's get into this. We're going to do a unilateral overcoming isometric plus liftoff. Okay, so I'm going to take a heavy object, something that I can't move, so something between a 5 to 15 kilogram weight plate. I'm going to have my palm facing down, so I'm in a little bit of internal rotation. I'm going to make sure my thoracic spine is extended here. Okay, I'm not going to be fully crunched and flexed at the thoracic spine. Okay, so I'm going to extend my thoracic spine because this is going to allow my scapula to retract. And now from here, I'm going to drive up. Push. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. It's going to feel really hard to initiate a strong contraction here, so don't go to your end range at first. So maybe I'm starting here. Push. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then go a little bit lower, sink into a bit more shoulder flexion, thoracic extension. Push. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And then go lower. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we could take these isometrics up to 10 seconds as well, so anywhere from 5 to 10 seconds. I like to do about 3 repetitions. And then I back off into a position that I can lift. And we're going to perform liftoffs. 6 to 8 repetitions, 3 to 5 second hold at the top. 3, 4, 5. Making sure to keep that thoracic extension, keep that scapular retraction. And lastly, I'm a firm believer that no rotator cuff rehab is complete without some sort of hanging. I think hanging is a great thing to do very early on. You could do it very high frequency. It's good traction for the shoulder. What's one of the roles of the rotator cuff? It's to keep the humeral head situated and centrated in the socket. So when I hang, there's a traction force. The humeral head wants to almost pop out, so we need to have a strong rotator cuff to keep it centered in. So this is where I like to add in a lot of active hanging variations. Okay, so active scapular hanging. If you have shoulder problems on both, then feel free to do this bilateral. Even if you have an injured side, you can always start this bilateral so you have the help of the good side to assist. But eventually, you want to do this in a archer. So if my right side is the injured side, I'm going to have slight assistance through the left arm here. And I'm going to keep my arms completely straight, retract the scapula, shift my weight to this right side, and then come out. Go from full traction, full hang, point my sternum toward the hand. I'm fully retracting my scapula. I'm fully extending at the thoracic spine. So let's show a different angle from the side here. So I'll work on my left side, shift weight to my left, full active hang, go into the passive hang. Okay, eventually we should be able to do this on one arm as the final progression. This one you want to work lower repetitions, anywhere from 4 to 6 repetitions with a 3 to 5 second hold each. Guys, that's the video. I hope you found it helpful. Again, this is just one perspective when looking at rotator cuff rehab. because it could be quite complex, and I just wanted to make this video within the context of improving shoulder flexion and improving that pain-free excursion for the arm to move fully overhead. Of course, everybody's going to be different. We're all going to need to start at a different level depending on the severity of the injury. But that being said, this is why an individual approach does matter. And these exercises may not work for your unique condition. So if you do want an individualized approach, feel free to reach out to me directly and we can do a one-on-one assessment. But in the meantime, there should be enough ideas and tools to work on within these 2 videos that you can apply to your own rotator cuff rehab and prehab. If there's any exercises within these videos that you really enjoyed, please let me know in the comments. Let's have a conversation about them. And if you do have any questions, please let me know, comment on the video, and I'd be happy to answer anything. So show the video some love, give it a like, subscribe to the channel. Let me know if there's any issues you're dealing with that you want me to make a video on. Until next time, get supple. I'm working on a new catchphrase. What do we think of that?